What's up, everybody? You're listening to Obsidian Radio, the voice of the everyday brother. I am your host, Mumia Obsidian Ali, and it is Wednesday, December 6, 2017. Welcome to the program. Glad you can make it, and thank you for listening. I so greatly and deeply appreciate it. 20 minutes past the hour, 20 minutes past the rush hour here in the city of brotherly love, and the temperature outside cold. It's damn near at the freezing point, and I'm buttoned up here at Obsidian Radio Central, trying to keep warm and all the rest of it. Haven't been on the air for the past few days. If you will know the reasons and all the situation going on there, if you receive the official Obsidian Radio newsletter. How do you get the Obsidian Radio newsletter? You get that by becoming a premium member of this daily podcast talk show by an everyday brother for everyday brothers. You can do that by becoming a Patreon or a private PayPal donor. All the details as to how you can get involved are going to be toward the end of today's show. Well, ladies and gentlemen, a number of things have been going on. I've been trying to keep tabs on everything that's been going on behind the scenes and whatnot here at Obsidian Radio Central. Something caught my eye, and I want to give a big shout out. Excuse me. Sorry about that. I want to give a big shout out to Anthony Brian Logan. He's been doing some really great work, doing a yeoman's job over on his channel. He definitely deserves your time and attention here on YouTube, as well as another YouTuber, black male YouTuber that I often disagree with, but nevertheless he does good work. He goes by the name of Antonio Moore. His channel here on YouTube is called Tone Talks. You definitely want to check that out. Both of them have been talking about the headlines that Oscar-winning actor and acclaimed director in his own right, Denzel Washington, has been making of late. I had a chance to listen to both Antonio Moore and Anthony Brian Logan's takes on this situation. I want to throw my hat into the ring. Apparently, Denzel Washington has gone on record in more recent days in saying that we should not blame the prison system for the reason why there are so many young black men in jail. Instead, he argues the reason for this situation is due to the lack of fathers in black American daily life. And I saw the actual clip that Denzel Washington himself making these statements, and if I can find that clip, I will include it in today's podcast. If not, then you could just jump on over to Anthony Brian Logan's channel and you can see the clip for yourself, because he embeds it in his podcast as well. And Denzel made a really simple point. He said, look, this was the situation when I was growing up, and he was born in 1954, so he would be well into his 60s at this point. And he said, I saw this situation when I was growing up, and it's the situation now that young boys, when they don't have a father figure at home, they're going to latch on to something somewhere else. The old adage, nature abhors a vacuum. And he said if it's no dad in the home, then it's going to be dad out on the street in the form of a gang or other, wayward ne'er-do-wells, etc. And of course he's correct. Of course he is. But not to be outdone, you know how we do in black America is the black Borg hive mind thinking. And Denzel was subject on black social media to all kinds of ad hominem attacks. He's a coon, sellout, all the rest. He's using the white man's talking points and all this sort of thing. Now, like I said, of course, Denzel is correct. Of course he is. How could it be otherwise? I mean, at this point, see, this is the thing with me. In the 21st century, I've said this before, but I'm going to keep hammering this point. You could make a case in the 20th century that these various problems and things of that nature, we just didn't know any better. You could make a case for that. We just didn't have the understanding that we have now in the 21st century, etc. so forth. But all bets are off now that we're in the 21st century. I'm sorry, that dog just won't hunt anymore. And the simple truth of the matter is, and out here I'm going to shout out Larry Elder. He said it. More dads, less crime. It really is that simple. Now, mind you, I didn't say more dads, no crime. I'm not saying that. I'm saying more dads, less crime. That's what I'm talking about. And so I wanted to focus on today's segment. I wanted to focus on something that, in my opinion, neither Moore nor Logan focused in on. And that's this. Before I get to that, let's be clear. This isn't the first time that Denzel Washington has come under fire for simply telling the truth. You will all kindly recall a year ago, as a matter of fact, if my memory serves, the film, which is an adaptation of the famous playwright August Wilson, the film Fences, which Denzel Washington directed, came out this time last year. And he came under attack for disagreeing with the notion of colorism somehow affecting black female actors in Hollywood. He disagreed with that argument. And he cited as an example his co-star in the film Fences, one Miss Viola Davis, who went on to win an Oscar. So the argument that a lot of black women try to put over, that somehow dark-skinned black women are somehow getting the shaft in Hollywood, that can't be true. Otherwise, explain how Viola Davis won an Oscar for the film Fences. Explain it. They never explain it. They always try to explain it away by saying, well, that's the exception to the rule. That's this, that's that. All right. Explain how Oprah has done very well in Hollywood. She doesn't fit the Barbie doll stereotype at all. And yet she's done extremely well in Hollywood. Oh, that's another exception to the rule. All right. Explain Lupita Nyong'o. She too has done very well, and she doesn't fit the Barbie doll stereotype. Explain Gaburi Sidibe, who played Precious in the film Precious. Explain that. I mean, we can go from example to example to example, completely discrediting and debunking the colorism argument. And yet, black women, for whom this applies, they will hold on and hang on to that argument no matter what. So this isn't the first time that Denzel Washington has run afoul of the black boy hive mind that we have in black America, not only for simply speaking his mind, but worse, speaking the obvious truth. Denzel Washington said last year, with regard to the whole situation with Viola Davis, that if you focus on being really good with your craft, if you really focus and you work hard, it's not going to happen overnight. There will be setbacks, but you will ultimately triumph in the end. And again, he pointed to Viola Davis as a case in point. And here right now, the situation that he finds himself in for telling the truth is simple. Look, if you have involved dads in the home in black America, crime goes down. That's the problem. That's the fundamental problem here with this crime piece. And you want to know something? Denzel Washington hit the nail on the head. I've talked about this before on the show, and it bears repeating. Many of you know I did a town watch. I participated in the town watch, and I break down all the reasons why I did that in the podcast series called The Social Contract. I've been meaning to get to part 3. God willing, and the creek don't rise, I will be getting to that part 3 very soon, so just stay tuned. But, you know, I worked up with a lot of police in that year that I did town watch here in Philadelphia. The district, or the police precinct that I worked with, and actually the neighborhood that I lived in at the time, actually overlapped. The two precincts actually were overlapping. So we had 2 police precincts. Both of those precincts were headed up by black men, black police captains. Many of the lieutenants were black. The duty sergeants were black. And of course, the cops walking the beat were black. they had bicycle cops, cops walking the beat, cops doing the beat in their cars. They were black men and black women. And what they told me, and a lot of the things that they told me, of course, at the time I didn't have my podcast, but if I did have it at the time, they probably would have, not wanted to go on the air, because cops, as Heather McDonald points out in her excellent book, The War on Cops are really under the gun nowadays with these false narratives like the Black Lives Fecal Matter bowel movement and so forth. But those cops told me in confidence, they said, look, man, we're sworn police. We're going to do our job. If there are knuckleheads out there, committing crimes and things of that nature, we're going to take care of it, because that's what we do. But he went on. I talked to a police captain who told me this. He went on to say, this is bigger than a crime thing. It's bigger than that. This isn't just a crime problem. This here is a social problem. It's a problem of the breakdown of the black family. It's a problem with the lack of dad's involvement. He talked about all of that. He said, and we cannot arrest our way out of this situation. Black police captain told me that face to face. I remember it like it was yesterday. And quite a few other cops have said the same thing to me in confidence in the years since. So of course, Denzel Washington is correct in his assessment. This idea of the new Jim Crow and all the rest of it, I know about Michelle Alexander's book. I'm very familiar with it. But I'm sorry, I don't buy the premise. I don't accept the premise. The simple truth of the matter is that when it comes to violent crime in Black America, because we have to keep in mind, and again, shout out to Miss Heather McDonald and her excellent book, The War on Cops. As she rightly points out, crime has dramatically dropped all over the country. You look at the big cities in America, including places like Chirac, including Chicago. If you compare the violent crime rate, homicide, rape, attempted murder, aggravated assault, those types of violent crimes, if you compare Chicago circa 1993 or so, and you compare Chicago today in 2017, it's a shadow of its former self. Still a problem, no doubt, particularly for black people. But overall, the crime rate has gone down. Same thing in New York City. New York City's violent crime rate is, it's like minuscule compared to where it was back in the early 1990s. And I happen to have been in New York City at that time. I can tell you, most people that go to New York City today love going to New York. They would not want to be caught dead in New York City circa 1993. I was out there on Bushwick Avenue. That's something else I want to talk about too. I've already talked about it with my newsletter guys. That's something else I want to talk about is Bushwick. We'll get to that by and by. So while the violent crime rate has empirically dropped, it's not a matter of personal opinion here. It's a matter of statistical and empirical evidence. Violent crime has dropped considerably across the country to historic lows. It still remains a major problem in the black precincts of America. Again, we can look at Chirac, for example. There's an excellent website, and I've talked about this before. I'm going to be referencing them again. There's an excellent website called HeyJackass.com. HeyJackass.com. All one word. I'll put it in the comments section in case you missed it. It's an excellent website that gives you all the numbers of shootings, homicides, you name it, in Chicago today in the 21st century. Excellent website. And I've referenced it before, and I'll be referencing it again, called HeyJackass.com. Now, the reason why I mention that is because, again, while crime overall has dropped significantly, it remains a problem in the black precincts. And so we have to look at why these crimes keep happening. The idea that poverty causes crime, that's not true. It's not true. Sorry. Poverty doesn't cause crime. What causes crime is a kind of antisocial mindset that is fueled in large part, when it comes to Black America, in large part it is fueled from the breakdown of the Black family and the failure of certain key arguments that Black America has held on to for a half a century. What do I mean by that? First, since we're talking about crime levels and how they dropped, let's consider the violent crime rate in Black America around the time that the film Fences was set in. Everybody by now has seen the film, again, starring and directed by Denzel Washington, co-star Viola Davis. She would go on to win an Oscar despite her being dark-skinned. Excuse me. The film is set in the 1950s in Pittsburgh. You know, one of the big cities here in my home state, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Pittsburgh on the west side of the state, Philadelphia on the east side of the state. At that time, crime in Black America was incredibly low. Thomas Sowell, famed scholar, economist, public intellectual, he talks frequently about his years growing up in New York City, in Harlem, sleeping out on the fire escape at night when it was too hot. And he said that was common. Many people did that. It just wasn't him. It was a lot of people did that. He's talked about people who would sleep in the park, and they wouldn't have to worry about being accosted or killed, raped, or what have you. Crime levels overall, I'm talking about both whites, blacks, and anybody else in the country, was extremely low in the 50s, and was particularly so with Black people in the 50s. You want to know when the crime stats actually went through the roof? Was in the 60s and going over into the 1970s, which just happens to coincide with the Great Society Welfare Mind State programs instituted by President Lyndon Baines Johnson. And you could say that, you know, causation is not correlation, or to put it the other way, correlation is not causation. Fair enough. But it is interesting to note that the rise of antisocial behavior, homicide, violent assault, attempted rape, and all the rest of it, just so happens that those levels started to rise at the same time that the welfare mind state came down the pipe. Isn't that interesting? So for me, Denzel Washington, I don't see what there is to disagree with. The man is right, and to me it reminds me of the situation that Bill Cosby went through more than a dozen years ago. Everybody will remember now, in the year 2004, when Bill Cosby was invited to give some remarks on the 50th anniversary of the Brown v. Board Supreme Court decision striking down separate but equal in terms of public education. He delivered what is now known as the Poundcake Speech, and he essentially said the same thing that Denzel Washington is saying right now. And we all heard that speech, and Bill Cosby stuck to his guns on that, and we all saw what happened to Bill Cosby. There was a concerted effort to discredit him, to besmirch his good name, you name it. And I fear the same thing could happen to Denzel Washington. The exact same thing could happen to him simply for recognizing the truth. So here's my take on this whole situation, because there's something that neither Tone Talks Antonio Moore nor Anthony Brian Logan have really dealt with, and it's no fault of their own. Here's the thing for me. First of all, we have to appreciate the fact that we're now living in a period where the majority of black Americans don't know what it's like to live in a two-parent home. And when you sit down and really think about that, that's a scary thought. I know it is to me, because I grew up in a two-parent home. Everybody that I knew in my social circle, with the exception of like one guy, was the same way. All black, and all of our parents were married and living together in the same home. Our mom and our dad were there. But the simple truth of the matter is that we're living in a period where the majority of black Americans don't know what it's like to come up in a two-parent home. More than likely, the overwhelming chances are that they grew up in a single mother baby mama home, and they will take great offense to someone like Denzel Washington saying, well, look, the problem is the breakdown of the black family. They'll take offense at it because in their view, their mama did okay raising them alone. How dare Denzel say something like that? Well, I'm sorry. The truth is what it is. I did a recent podcast in response to the overgrown simp Derek Jackson in his recent book extolling the virtues of single mothers. I did a book review on that. And in that book review, I relayed statistics all up and down the chain that bear out the simple fact that women who have kids without benefit of marriage increase their chances of being in poverty in some astronomical numbers, like 7 times worse or something like that. Again, I don't think poverty causes crime. But I do believe that the lack of having a consistent father figure in the home does contribute to an antisocial mindset and contributes to the situation that we see going on right now in the black precincts of the country, of the lawlessness, of the overall and total disregard for law and order, for the oppositional stance that so many black Americans have. And because it's such an alien concept for so many black people now to relate to the idea of being raised by a mother and a father, both married in the home, I think this is part of the reason why we have such a huge backlash. Now, for me, where I sit on all this, I believe that Denzel is likely to undergo a Bill Cosby treatment type situation. He has to really watch his back now. He's got to watch his 6 like I don't know what. Because there's something else that I want to get to as to why I said what I just said. See, there's this idea, some of you may recall, roughly a decade ago, maybe no longer than that, it would have been like a dozen years ago, something like that, the idea of peak oil, the idea that humanity was going to exhaust the earth's fuel reserves, oil reserves and whatnot. Well, whether that will happen or not, I don't know. I'm not a geologist. I'm not a petroleum expert. Time will tell. But I like that idea of peak oil. The idea that we kind of maxed out that particular resource. I would like to submit to the Grand Assembly today that Black America is facing its own peak situation. I call it the peak narrative. We have reached peak narrative. Now, what do I mean by that? Many of you who listen to the show for any length of time will know that I have cited this book on numerous occasions called Disintegration, the Splintering of Black America, written by Eugene Robinson. And Eugene Robinson makes an argument in the book that's pretty straightforward. Some would say simplistic. I wouldn't disagree, but his argument is nevertheless sound. He argues that there is no more a black community. We no longer have such a thing. Such a thing no longer exists. Instead, what he argues is that there are several black Americas. And in the book, he divides them into 4 distinct groups. What he refers to as the transcendent, the mainstream, the emergent, and the abandoned. It's a really good book. It's about 6 or 7 years old at this point. It merits your time and attention. And I think he really hits the nail on the head here. And his argument with regard to the emergent group, which is comprised of blacks moving to the United States as immigrants, and their children, which would be, they would be fully Americanized, if you will. He notes that the strides and success that they've made in their lives completely undermines the argument that so many homegrown black Americans make, if you will, with regard to a legacy of slavery, racism, Jim Crow, white supremacy, etc. If that argument were true, it would apply to this emergent group of black Americans. It does not. They succeed, they achieve, and they make good lives for themselves here in the United States. So clearly, again, that undermines the legacy of slavery argument. If we look at black America circa 1950, we again see more evidence that undermines this legacy of slavery argument. Crime rates, very low. Marriage rates, very high. Father in the home rates, very high. Antisocial behaviors, very low. You name it. But this narrative continues with full force, and I'm going to explain to you the reason why that is. See, that narrative of a legacy of slavery, of Jim Crow and racism and white supremacy, see, that is a discursive or a diversionary tactic. And I'm going to be talking about other diversionary tactics soon on this show, so stay tuned. That's a diversionary tactic that keeps black Americans from having to deal with the failure of black America. What we're seeing going on in black America right now is basically the fruit of following a line of thinking and argument that just hasn't worked. And again, I cite 2 powerful sources of data and evidence that bears it out. You have black Americans in the form of immigrants and their children doing very well in this country. And you have black Americans of time past who actually lived under Jim Crow, and they were doing better than a lot of black Americans are right now. Again, look at the black marital rate. It's like night and day. I argue, ladies and gentlemen, that we have reached peak narrative. The narrative just doesn't work anymore. That dog just will not hunt anymore. It is what it is. It doesn't work. It really is as simple as that. And it's getting harder and harder for black folks to argue for the narrative in the face of evidence that you don't need to be a policy wonk to see it. You just need one good eye. Look, man, marriage works. I'm sorry. I know that there, a lot of black people, black women in particular, will argue that, there were bad marriages. Yes, there were bad marriages back in the day. Yes, that's true. Yes, there was infidelity, not just by black men, black women too. See, a lot of black women like to leave that part out of it. It takes 2 to tango, sis. So yes, you had infidelity. Yes, you had unhappy marriages. No doubt about it. I don't deny that. That sort of thing did exist. Granted. But I'm sorry, the overwhelming evidence is overwhelming. Marriage works. If you and when it comes to bringing up children, marriage works. You know, I was listening to a interview that Tom Likas did with Kay Heimowitz, who is a fellow at the Manhattan Institution and is a colleague of Heather McDonald. And she made a really good point in that interview that she did with Tom Likas. She said, in her opinion, there's only one real purpose for marriage, and that is to see to it that the children that are born of that union are raised in a stable environment with a constant male figure in their life. And I agree with that assessment. I mean, when you really sit down and think about it, what other actual utilitarian purpose does marriage serve? And she would go on to say that, you know, our society is trying to make it mean all these other things. But the simple truth of the matter is that we haven't come up with a better way of rearing children to adulthood. Now, to be sure, and she would agree with this, there are other ways of doing it. You know, there could be extended family members. There are notable exceptions of single baby mamas. Sure. But in the aggregate, we haven't come up with a better way, a better replacement for a dad in the home. And that's huge for America, because, you know, when we have these conversations, you know, somebody will invariably mention Iceland or Sweden or whatever. This ain't Iceland. This is not Sweden. The United States relies heavily on marriage to make sure that we have good citizens. And, you know, I say this as a confirmed bachelor. You know, a lot of people may say that what I'm saying sounds strange coming from me, a confirmed bachelor and self-described hedonist. But I see things for what they are. And the simple truth of the matter is, having grown up in Black America all my life, the simple truth of the matter is that when you have more dads read Married to the Baby Mama, living in the same home as the baby mama, raising the kids together, you have less crime, less chaos, less anarchy. That's just the plain truth. Less violence. You know, single motherhood breeds violence. That's true. I even wrote an article about this for A Voice for Men some time back. I'll go and dig it up and put it in the comment section below. It just is what it is. There's just no getting around that fact. And the more that we try to get around that fact, the harder it becomes for us to justify the narrative in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary, both currently, again, in the form of what Eugene Robinson calls the emergent, and our own history. You know, it's fascinating to hear, you know, Black folks who take on the narrative, so to speak. They always want to talk about chattel slavery, but they never mention the 20th century. Isn't that fascinating? And I think there's a reason for it. I don't think it's by accident. I think a lot of these Black folks know the truth. That's why they don't mention the 20th century. The 20th century was a huge period of Black American achievement and advancement, even in the face of Jim Crow. We still achieved. And the reason why a lot of people are upset with Denzel is because what he's talking about has proven to work, and the narratives and philosophies and isms that so many of these people have glommed onto has proven to fail. I'm sorry, having a nation of baby mamas doesn't work. No disrespect to gay and lesbian people, but the simple truth is they could adopt, you know, untold numbers of kids. It's not enough of them to fix this problem. Grandma and granddad, great people, no doubt, but they're not a replacement for a mom and a dad. Black people have to start looking at what works and stop stewing in their own feelings of butthurt and resentment and grievance, and just, you know, grow up and accept the fact that in the United States, what works best for rearing good citizens is marriage. I'm not saying everybody has to do it. Again, I'm a confirmed bachelor. But I realize what the truth is. Bachelors don't make a society. Married men make societies. Bachelorettes and spinsters don't make a society. Married women who are moms make a society. That's the truth. That's just the truth. And the idea that somehow racism and Jim Crow and slavery and all the rest is somehow playing a role in stultifying Black American achievement in the 21st century is bunk. That somehow it's because of this prison industrial complex that so many young black men are in jail. That's ridiculous. I grew up in the crack wars. I knew guys who were drug dealers. I had the opportunity to be a drug dealer. You want to know the reason why I didn't take it? Because I was afraid of what my dad would do. Let me tell you all a story real quick while I'm on that point. 18 years old, came of age in a area of city of Philadelphia known as the Badlands. Look it up. One of the biggest open air drug markets in the country at the time. Had a buddy of mine. We call him Spanish Ed, Puerto Rican guy. And he was maybe a year older than me, 19 or so. A friend. And he was a drug dealer. At the age of 19, he had his own house, huge big screen TV set. At the time, I was heavily into doing, DJing and turntablism. He had the latest equipment all in his basement. And he would frequently have over guys to spin on his turntables and stuff like that, hang out. One day, I was over at his crib. I watched that man, or actually boy, count over $250,000 on his living room table. He had one of those money counting machines that you see in like Scarface and all that. He had one of those. Along the wall behind him sat a dozen 5-gallon water jugs filled with coins. He had people coming to his crib day and night, crackheads, literally nickel and diming crack. Okay? And he would often say to me, Obsidian, man, you're a real smart guy, man. I could use a guy like you in my operation and stuff like that. And I turned it down. And the reason why I turned it down was because I wasn't afraid of the police. That wasn't my concern. I was afraid of what my dad would do if he found out that his boy was a drug dealer. Mind you now, I'm actually looking at over $250,000 in cash. I ask those listening right now, have you ever seen $250,000 or more in cash on a table? Have you ever seen it? Have you ever personally witnessed something like that? I have. I was 18 at the time. I could have gotten into the drug game. I didn't because of my dad. So this idea that, people talking about that, they want to blame the crack wars and all of that, that's bunk. What matters is having a dad in the home. It works. And black people have just got to stop making excuses and coming up for reasons why they just don't do what works. Just do what works. Denzel is right. Of course he is. And for him being right, we can expect Black America to turn on him just like they did to Bill Cosby. We can expect it. And it would be a damn shame when it does. You're listening to Obsidian Radio, which is 100% supported by listeners like you. And if you like what you heard on today's podcast talk show heard only on YouTube, then what the heck are you waiting for? Put 5 on it and become one of the 300 Patreons I need to stay on the air getting bigger and better. All the details are going to be over on my Patreon page, www.patreon.com/Mumia Obsidian Ali. Do it now. You'll be glad that you did. For those who wish to become soldados in the invisible army here at Obsidian Radio by becoming a private PayPal donor, all you need to do is hit up yours truly first at theobsidianfiles@hotmail or at gmail.com. Please put in the subject line donations, and I'll be sure to walk you through from there. $5, 5,000 bucks you give wherever you think the show is worth on a recurring monthly basis. We are in the midst of our fall end of the year fund and membership drive here at Obsidian Radio, and we don't rely on any corporate or ad funding of any kind. Since day one of operations here at Obsidian Radio on YouTube, that would have been Wednesday, June the 2nd, 2015, we have not taken one red cent from Google AdSense or any other corporate sponsor. And we do that for a very simple reason, because if we take money from these folks, the old adage is true: he who pays the piper calls the tune. And so if we were to take money from these entities, then we would have to do as they say. I would rather do what you, my listening audience, says. I'm accountable only to you. And if you like that idea, where we can have the kind of conversations that we just had just now on the question of, and this topic of Denzel Washington and his remarks and how he's likely to get the Bill Cosby treatment because of it, then support the show. This is how the show is supported, by not only my efforts, but by your financial support. I really appreciate that. Please, oh, by the way, before I get off the air, I almost forgot to do that. Please don't forget to like, share, and to subscribe to this channel and other channels in the Obsidian Media Network universe. Please don't forget to bang the bell so you know what yours truly's got cooking in the kitchen there. And finally, please don't forget to share this podcast with a brother that you know, love, and respect. The life you save may very well be his. My name is Mumia Obsidian Ali, and I approved this message, you peak narrative Negroes. Stay tuned. We are going to come back. Peace.